So today we are going to be making these little reversible fabric boxes. Obviously you can turn them the other way out and have the fabric the other way. They do come in, I think I've got 5 different sizes written on the instructions. And to do them in the other sizes, what you'll do is cut your fabric in a square, and then you'll just cut out the corners according to the size on the instructions. So say it's 2 inches by 2 inches, you'll just go in 2 by 2 and then cut that wee square out, and that's your pattern sorted. So let's get started. You're going to have 2 pieces for your main or your outside, and then 2 pieces for the inside. They are all exactly the same size, and what you're going to do then is just iron, give them all a wee press. Probably should have done this before we started. Okay, and then on the wrong side of your main pieces, then you're going to put interfacing. You want sort of quite a stiff interfacing, really, just so it holds its shape and stands upright. I'm not sure if you can see on this, but there is sort of a shiny side. Some bits will have like wee dots, which are like wee glue dots. You want the glue facing the wrong side of your lining, or your main, sorry. I usually just cut mine a bit bigger, and then hold your iron for about 5 seconds roughly, lift, move on to the next bit, and you'll do that for the whole lot. And then I usually just trim it down to size. I think it's easier doing that way instead of having to be too precise about your cutting out. And just give it a wee iron over the top. Make sure you haven't missed any bits. Okay. Then trim off the excess. Okay, so now you want to put these right sides together. So the right side is obviously the pretty side of the fabric. Wrong side's the side with the interfacing. You're going to set them on top of each other. And then we're going to put pins all the way down here and all the way along the bottom. You're not going to be doing the top or these wee cutout bits. And you're going to repeat the same for the lining. I also always like to pin the start and the end of anything that I'm sewing. Start and the end, and then pin in between. Sometimes, whatever way you've cut it, or you've maybe got one side slightly longer than the other, but you can always sort of stretch it to fit. And I've never had an issue doing it that way. Whereas sometimes if you start at one end, by the time you get to the other end, there's about 1 inch of a difference. Also, I put my pins in this direction. You can technically sew over the top of them that way, as long as your pins aren't too thick without breaking a needle. If you pin going in that way or going in that way, you're going to end up breaking a needle if you try to sew over it. Along the bottom at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. We're also going to may as well pin the lining whilst we're here, and then it means we can sew both at the same time. My lining is a wee bit hard to tell the right and the wrong side, so I'm not too worried what direction I'm putting these together. But obviously if you have a pattern or anything on yours, you want it to be going the correct way, so you don't end up with stripes going one direction and then on the other side them going the other way. There we go. So let's take these over to the machine, and we will sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance along the sides and the bottom only, not the cutouts, not the tops. So I left my mic in the kitchen, so I'm going to have to voice over the other half of this video. So yes, you're going to take your main then and bring it over to your machine, and you're going to be sewing at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. which is the wee line just before the 2 wee dots there. So just lower your presser foot, put your needle down, do a wee back stitch. And then just remove your pins as you sew, and you want to keep the raw edge of the fabric just in line with that wee line as you're going. And sew all the way down. And then once you come up to the edge there, you're going to do a wee back stitch. Then you can take it out of the machine and cut your threads if you want, but to be honest, I usually just pull the threads a wee bit like that, put them to the back, and then go along and do the bottom part. So again, keeping it in line with that wee line, do a wee back stitch and pull out your pins as you go. Just keep it in line with that the wee line there beside the 2 holes. And then you're going to sew all the way to the end there, and then do another wee back stitch. And then just repeat then for the final side. And leave them wee cutouts open, and leave the top of the box open. So all the way up to the top. And then do a wee back stitch again. And then take your threads out, you're going to trim. And then anywhere like the wee corners where the cutouts are, just trim them as well. Get them all out of the way. And that's it. And then you're just going to repeat those steps then for the lining. And again, just make sure you're not sewing the top of the bag or the cutouts, or the box, sorry, or the cutouts. Then you're going to pull the cutouts at the bottom open. I think I was having a bit of difficulty here. Spread your seam allowances open on both sides. And then you're just going to nest those on top of each other and put a wee pin on the seam allowances just to hold them down, so whenever you go to sew over them, they're not getting caught. And then put a wee pin at the start and a wee pin at the end. Then what you're going to do is do a wee back stitch at the beginning, sew straight across to the end. And I usually just line mine up with the edge of the presser foot for doing the cutouts at the bottom. So there we go, wee back stitch. And as you're coming up to where them seams are, then just go slow and all the way over to the end and do a wee back stitch again. And trim your threads. And then just repeat that for the other corner. Spread them seam allowances open and pin them in place. And then again, just put a wee pin at the start and the end. And then line that up with the edge of the presser foot and do a wee back stitch at the beginning and the end. Just take your time over the bits where the seam allowances are and trim your wee threads. And there you go, that gives your box the shape then and helps it stay upright. So then you're going to repeat that then just for the lining. As you can see here, mine did get caught a wee bit there. And now what you're going to do is you're going to turn your lining the right way out, so that all your seam allowances that you've just sewn are on the inside, and then poke your wee corners out at the bottom. There we go, see what I mean? You can't see the seam allowance there at all. There on the inside. So now what you're going to do is you're going to take the lining that's the right way out, and you're going to put it inside the main, which is the wrong way out. So you'll just pop it down inside. And you're going to match your wee seams up again. So again, spread the seam allowances open and match those wee seams up. There we go. I think I was struggling a wee bit with that one. So match that one up. And put a wee pin on either side here then, just to hold them open. And then you'll repeat that for the other side. Again, opening up the seam allowances. And just match them seams. There we go. Now what you're going to do is just pin around the top of the bag. And when you come to sew this, you want to leave an opening in the top. I'd say about 3 inches roughly, just for turning it the right way out. But pin right round. Sometimes I like to put 2 pins wherever I need to stop and start, or I'll use a clip or something like that to indicate I need to start and stop sewing at that point, just so we don't sew it all shut. So pin it all round. There we go. And then just going to pull the wee machine back over and slide that wee bit off to the left. And then if you slip your bag over, or your box, sorry, over, and then we're lining it up, it's going to be a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so that wee line beside the 2 holes again. Put your needle down, do a wee back stitch. And where you're leaving your opening, do not leave it at the side seams, because you kind of want them to be perfectly matched, so you're better sewing them first and then leave the opening on another area. So you're going to sew right round. Any time that you need to pull your bag under to get it, see that's caught there, just make sure your needle's down in the fabric and then pull it through with your hand and then start sewing again. I think just because of the interfacing on it, it does make it quite stiff, so it's a wee bit awkward. But again, so over the other side, same. Coming back round and making sure that you pull your pins out as you go. And there we go. I'm going to leave that wee open in there and do a wee back stitch. Take out any pins as well that you've left behind. See the way there's one there. You don't want to be sewing it shut and there's a pin stuck inside and jigging yourself. So through that wee hole then, you're going to reach in and grab the main, pull it through the hole and just sort of wiggle and push as you go. It is a wee bit awkward. The bigger the hole you leave, the easier it is to get through, but I tend to leave a really small hole, so it makes my life a bit more awkward, but that's just me. So push it all through and then pull it all out. Poke your wee corners out at the bottom. Just give them a wee wiggle back and forward with your finger and your thumb. There we go. Okay, and then what you're going to do is you're going to tuck your lining into your box. Keep saying bag. Okay, and we're going to close that wee hole up there that we left. So if you poke the raw edges inside, and you almost want your lining to sit, or your main to sit slightly higher than the lining. See the way I have it there? It just looks a wee bit neater. And then give it a wee press, and then put a few pins in there just to hold that the wee hole shut until we can get it sewn together. Okay, and then I just give it a wee press round. I think it just makes it look a wee bit more crisp. So, yeah, give it a wee press with the iron, and again, make sure your lining, or your main, sorry, is sitting slightly higher. See the way you can still see a wee bit of the pink and orange stripe there on the black. It does just look nicer, to be honest. So just wiggle it with your fingers and then give it a wee press with the iron all the way around. Watch you don't iron over your pins because they will melt. So we're going to do a wee top stitch right round the top. So I like to change mine to number 11 on this wee sewing machine, but if you look at the needle, it moves to the left. There's a wee ridge in the middle of that, so in the foot, if you see it there, you want to keep that wee line on the edge, like the top edge of your box. And what it's going to do is, it's because the needle's sitting slightly to the left, it'll sew very, very close to the edge, as long as you keep it in line with the wee sort of dimple in the middle of the sewing foot. So do a wee back stitch at the beginning, and you're just going to sew the whole way round. I know we're only closing the hole, but it looks neater if you sew the whole way round. And again, anytime that you need to move the box, just make sure your needle's in the fabric and pull it through. And just keep sewing right round then. It is a wee bit more awkward when you come up to the side seams, just because it's a bit thicker with the interfacing and that there. Just take your time with it and you'll be fine. You'll just sew straight over it. And you just keep going right round, and again, just pulling it through from the bottom, making sure your needle's in whenever you are pulling it through. And that's us almost back to the start here. So I just do a couple of wee back stitches over where the start is, and that just locks everything in place then. And then just trim off your threads. And then back over to the iron, just give it another wee press. Again, just gets rid of all the wee wrinkles that from turning it the right way around. So I just kind of went inside the box and ironed right down all four sides. And then you're going to turn the top over. That's up to you what height you want the turnover to be at the top. Just have a wee look and make sure it's even, and then give it another wee press. And there we go, all done. So nice and easy. You can turn it the other way if you want to, or leave it as is. It's up to you. But there you go.